Hi everyone, good evening. Just wait for another minute for everyone to join this evening. Great, I think we'll get started. So good evening everyone and welcome to our very first webinar of 2023, which is going to be all about plant-based diets over a lifetime. And we're going to be kicking off with a very short talk on nutrients of focus on a vegan diet, and joined by Sam Gould RD, registered dietitian Sam Gould, and Dr Shireen Kassam, who you all know, of course, as the founder and director of Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, and then Jane Thurnell-Read, who is the Veganuary Trustee and best-selling author. She recently did a great event for us just before Christmas on about self-publishing. So let's get started. Just before we kick off with my presentation, I just want to quickly remind you of some of the upcoming webinars we have later on this year. So we'll have Dr Shireen Kassam in February, but before that, we're going to be joined by Dr Urvi Shah, who is a hematologist, oncologist, and physician scientist in the USA. She's going to be discussing dietary research in cancer, and specifically her research into plant-based diets and plasma cell disorders, as well as sharing her own experience of living with Hodgkin's lymphoma as well. I also want to thank all of our sponsors, the ProVeg International, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, who kindly provide CME accreditation for this webinar, along with the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. This particular webinar is not CPD or CME accredited, but all of our other upcoming webinars are. And we're also supported by veganfitness.com, who kindly lend us their Zoom platform. For those of you who are new to our webinars, Plant-Based Health Professionals UK is a community interest group dedicated to promoting the benefits of a sustainable and healthy whole food plant-based diet. I also want to remind you about the upcoming Winchester course, which kicks off on January 17th, and places are still open. This is the UK's only university accredited plant-based diploma, and it features many of our advisory board members, team members, and our founder, the founder of Plant-Based Health Professionals, Dr Shireen Kassam, who set up this course. Lastly, a reminder to support our work. Do consider joining us as a member. This is open to everyone around the world, and visit PBHP.UK to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter, or donate if you enjoyed our webinar at pbhp.uk/donate. And we're also active on social media platforms as well, where we'll let you know about our latest upcoming events. So let's kick off, because this is a really big topic, and we're going to be covering it in a really sort of whistle-stop way. And we're going to be talking about the key nutrients that we need to focus on in a plant-based diet. Just before I get started, I want to mention that, of course, every single person is different, and it also, the nutrients that we might need to pay more attention to also depend on our age, our stage of life, our other health conditions, our activity levels, and so many other aspects. So this is just a sort of general guide, and it's not intended for individual medical advice. And do consider speaking to a qualified health professional before you start supplementing with anything new, because as we know, supplements are not without their effects. For those of you who don't know me, I spend my days as communication lead at Plant-Based Health Professionals, and I also run my own practice. I have an MSc in Nutrition and Food Sciences, and I'm board certified in Lifestyle Medicine as well. I think many of you would be familiar with the reasons why we see this as such a priority at Plant-Based Health Professionals: for ethical reasons, for environmental reasons, and health reasons. In this talk, however, we're going to be really drilling down into the nutrients of focus. That we have lots of information on our website about the reasons to eat more plants, and also other links to other resources up there as well. So do reach out if you're looking for more guidance on this. And of course, the Veganuary website is full of information on this topic. Before we kick off with the specific nutrients, I can't emphasize how strongly how important this statement was when it was released by the British Dietetic Association, which is the leading dietetic organisation here in the UK, which confirmed that well-planned vegan diets can support healthy living in people of all ages, And this is backed up by other leading nutrition and dietetic organizations around the world, including the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in the USA. So that's really promising news and something that you can show health professionals if they're not sure about your new vegan diet, or family members or friends who might be concerned. So it would be easy to do a quick session about the benefits of plant-based diets. They're obviously huge, and we talk about them all the time, from being naturally lower in saturated fat, free of cholesterol, high in fiber, high in polyphenols, other phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals, fiber, of course. Only 1 in 10 UK adults meets the fiber recommendation. The RDA is about 30 grams in the UK. So we know that plant-based diets are absolutely fantastic on delivering on all of those fronts. However, as at plant-based health professionals, we want to ensure that people who are following plant-based diets are thriving, getting the most out of them, and are feeling really confident about their choices. That enables us to follow this dietary approach, and of course ethical lifestyle if you are a vegan as well, for the rest of our lives, hopefully. So these are the really key nutrients that we want to focus on, and there's 8 here, and this is just going to scratch the surface of what these are all about, but I've just done this little table here which summarizes the key ways to get these. Vitamin B12, vitamin D are ones that we absolutely need to supplement. That's non-negotiable really for the most part. And then the other ones we're also going to be talking about where you can get them from food sources, but in some cases supplements might also be advisable, particularly if some of these foods are out of your reach for various reasons, or you find it hard to access these foods or get enough of them. And this is something that a qualified nutritionist or a dietitian might be able to help you with if you're looking for more individual advice. We do have a directory at Plant-Based Health Professionals, which has lists of all of these health professionals who specialize in plant-based diets. When it comes to vitamin B12, this is a nutrient that's actually made by microorganisms in the soil, not plants or animals. However, it is usually obtained from animal products, whether via fortification of animal feed or animals that have been injected with B12, or through another way. Of course, grass-fed meat also contains B12 and things like that, but we see it as the best way of getting B12 is through supplementation, and there is good amounts of data to also show that omnivores and people eating animal products can also be deficient in vitamin B12. And it's incredibly easy to get a B12 supplement. It's safe, cheap, affordable, and it's essential on a plant-based diet. So we want to aim for 10 micrograms daily, or at least 2,000 micrograms weekly. And this is a water-soluble nutrient as well. And it's also sometimes found in fortified foods, such as a lot of the new meat alternatives, plant-based drinks, things like nutritional yeast, which is often used as a cheesy, umami kind of replacement in food. It's really delicious. It's often fortified with vitamin B12, but you should always check the label. And ideally, supplementation is best unless you are absolutely certain that you get at least 3 daily portions from 3 daily servings from fortified foods. When it comes to calcium, the average adult needs about 700 milligrams per day, and more or less is needed sometimes at different stages of life, for example, during breastfeeding, or if someone has been diagnosed with osteoporosis or celiac disease. But this is an essential nutrient for strong bones and teeth and healthy muscle and nerve function. But the good news is, whilst if you say calcium to most people, they immediately think of dairy, there are absolutely tons of plant-based sources. The most reliable, of course, are your calcium-fortified plant milks and yogurts and calcium-set tofu. Not all tofu contains added calcium. There are more and more tofus on the market that are set using nigari, which is the type of seaweed. So you can have a look at the back. Cauldron is a brand that I've come across that's fortified with calcium. And there are also good amounts in low oxalate green vegetables such as rocket, kale, bok choy, and broccoli, things like that, and beans, especially white beans, chia seeds, almond butter. And as with particularly micronutrients like iron or zinc, you really want to avoid those high intakes of sodium, caffeine, alcohol, and for iron, you want to avoid tannins that are found in tea and things, but we'll come to that. And there is no negative impact if dairy is avoided, as long as the calcium requirements and things are obviously met. calcium naturally pairs with vitamin D, and when it comes to vitamin D, this is actually produced by the action of sunlight on our skin, and it's very difficult to obtain at this time of year. We recommend that people who are following plant-based diets consider taking vitamin D throughout the year, and this is especially important if you spend a lot of time indoors, or you have another condition like celiac disease, or if you have darker skin like myself. But it's a team effort really with bone health, and we have a great fact sheet on our website all about the best nutrients to focus on for bone health. Omega-3 fats gets a lot of attention, and we do plan to have a webinar that will do a deeper dive into this topic, because we're still looking at more and more research coming out on this. But this is an essential nutrient that's needed for brain, joint, cardiovascular health, and a really good way to get good amounts of the alpha-linoleic acid, which is found in plant-based sources, is to have at least one of the following every day. So a tablespoon of ground flax seeds, chia seeds, I mill those to increase absorption as well, hemp seeds or walnut halves, or you can do a mix of all of these and add them to your porridge or your soup or whatever you like. And do consider an algae-derived DHA or EPA supplement, particularly if you are pregnant, breastfeeding, or if you're looking after infants or small children, or you are an older adult, so over the age of, I'd say 60, 65, and it's worth considering that if it does fit into your budget. These supplements do tend to be a bit more expensive, and we actually have a whole guide around omega-3 supplements in our children's section or our kids section of our website, which also covers pregnancy and other things. So if this applies to you, then do check that out or circulate it with anyone who might be interested. Iodine is another micronutrient, which means we need really small amounts of it, but it's incredibly important for thyroid health and for preventing DNA damage, things like that. It's especially critical in preconception, pregnancy, and breastfeeding. And supplement is the most reliable way of getting enough iodine, with 140 micrograms that's needed per day for adults. We do recommend going up to 200 micrograms for women who are pregnant, but again, do check that with your doctor. We have some advice from our pediatrician at Plant-Based Health Professionals, Dr. Miriam. So one of the best forms is a potassium iodide supplement. And some fortified plant milks, like some oat milks, and there's also the plant milks that are sold by places such as M&S, do contain added iodine, and we're seeing more and more of those on the market, which is really great. Seaweed is often touted as a good source of iodine. However, it has quite variable amounts, and it's often something that's not naturally present in most people's diet. So if you enjoy the taste of it, then that's great. You need about 4 sheets of nori a day, I think. But you really want to avoid things like kelp, which actually have really high levels of iodine, and that can lead to different issues with your thyroid, and hijiki, which can be contaminated with arsenic as well. So if you're not used to eating seaweed, then it's something that I would recommend taking a supplement over starting with that. When it comes to iron, people often get quite concerned about plant-based diets. However, the main reason why iron deficiency occurs in people who menstruate is actually due to heavy losses in menstrual fluid. And iron deficiency actually affects 1/3 of the world's population. So it's the most common nutritional deficiency. And there are mixed studies, some studies showing that plant-based eaters may be at slightly higher risk, other studies showing neutral impact of plant-based diets, and some actually showing less risk with totally plant-based diets versus vegetarians or lacto-ovo-vegetarians, for example. So the really key way to make sure that you are getting enough iron is obviously through your diet, but also you can get a blood test to assess levels, particularly if you are someone that does have heavy periods. Heme iron, which is found in animal foods, may increase the risk of certain cancers, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. We're talking more about things like red meat here. And there are loads of really great non-heme sources of iron, and the best way to consume these is ideally by pairing these with vitamin C. And we've seen cultures around the world do this, whether it's pairing things like bell peppers with tofu, or putting a squeeze of lemon or fresh coriander on your dal, or some berries on your porridge. So make the most of combining this to increase iron absorption. Beans, seeds, dark leafy greens, oats, quinoa, dried fruit. There are so many different options out there, and some foods are also being increasingly fortified with iron. And we know that soaking, fermenting and sprouting can significantly reduce the phytate levels that are found in grains that might prevent you from absorbing that iron. And that can actually increase the bioavailability and the absorption of iron and zinc. Zinc is one that really doesn't get enough attention, and you'll notice that the RDA is slightly higher for men. So for men who are listening, do pay extra attention to zinc in your diet. Really good sources are things like wholemeal bread, where the absorption is actually improved by the process of making the bread, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts and seeds. So as you can see, most plant-based foods do contain some zinc, and again, we want to try to sprout, soak, ferment foods as much as possible to get that. Even just soaking your oats the night before you cook them will make a huge difference. So I highly recommend that as a quick hack to increase levels. And some multivitamins and some vegan multivitamins do also include zinc. So have a look and check that out. And hopefully we see more out there that include added zinc. But this is, again, a micronutrient that you just need a small amount of, but plays a really important role for wound healing and for immune health and so on. Selenium is one of those other micronutrients that doesn't get talked about enough, and really important for healthy skin, hair and nails, for immune health. So it got a bit more attention during the COVID-19 pandemic. And a good way of getting enough selenium is having 1 to 2 Brazil nuts a day. However, amounts really do vary in Brazil nuts as well, depending on soil quality where they're grown. But there are good amounts in other plant-based foods, particularly intact whole grains. So things like pinhead oats, cashews, sunflower seeds, brown rice is another really good source of selenium, and beans. But you can also consider taking a supplement if you think that you're not meeting your needs. And things like the Veg1 supplement from the Vegan Society does contain selenium as well. So last thing to mention is, if this all feels like, oh, there's a lot to consider, that feels a bit overwhelming, maybe you're trying Veganuary for the first time and you are worried about thinking you have to take loads of different supplements, I just want you to remember the most important thing is focusing on color, getting a variety of different plant foods into your diet. Doesn't need to be all the, just things like avocado, which obviously are extremely expensive right now. But you can get a really good amount from combining fresh and frozen produce. And we have loads of different recipes on our website at Plant-Based Health Professionals, as well as other tips. And follow organizations like Made in Hackney, which share lots of budget-friendly plant-based recipes. They're just getting more and more color, more diversity of plants in your plate. Herbs and spices are cheaper way of getting some of those in, is my advice to you. So in a nutshell, base your meals around whole plant foods, focus on what you're adding into the diet, not what you're removing. Include plenty of colourful fruits and vegetables, particularly your orange and yellow vegetables, dark leafy greens and berries, whole grains. So don't think you have to cut out carbohydrates for January, focus on the quality of the carbohydrates that you're including. So things like brown pasta, brown rice, quinoa, all of these things. 3 daily servings of legumes, and include soya because it's packed with so many different nutrients. We have a great soya fact sheet on our website. So tofu, tempeh, edamame, beans, lentils of all varieties, soy milk, these all count. And don't forget your healthy fats like avocados, nuts and seeds. Things like tahini can be really versatile. You can put it in hummus or drizzle it on vegetables. And include herbs and spices to up the antioxidant content of your meals. So simple things like putting some cinnamon on your oats, parsley or coriander in a dal or a stew, turmeric in your oats for kind of a winter warming porridge. And the key things to really remember, if there's 2 things to supplement starting today, it's B12 and vitamin D. And do consider other supplements like iodine, selenium, algae-derived omega-3, maybe zinc, or iron if you think if you need it. But the best thing to do in those 2 situations is to consult a qualified health professional before you supplement if you're still not too sure. We have loads of information on our website, including a whole page about micronutrients, which I haven't included here, but you can go and check that out. And lots of different things such as the plant-based Eat Well guide, if you're not sure exactly how to get started on a plant-based diet. We also have a fact sheet on weight management. We have a 21-day plant-based program, which you can start totally free of charge, where you get emails and recipes to your inbox. And here are the references. So that was my whistle-stop tour of nutrients of focus on a plant-based diet. Hopefully it probably left you with a lot of questions that can hopefully be answered by our website, but I'm going to pass over to Shireen now to get started for our panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Rohini, and welcome everyone. It's lovely to be here. I've just been scanning through the names of attendees, and it's probably 80% are members, which is lovely to be amongst our friends and of course family members who always support. So thank you. So as Rohini says, my name's Shireen Kassam and I'm founder and director of Plant-Based Health Professionals. I set up the organisation to provide credible education and advocacy on healthy plant-based diets. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we have a wonderful team, wonderful members who've got a lot of really useful information to share. And our real goal is to try and embed this information and knowledge into healthcare and medical curricula within the UK and beyond. And we're making small inroads to doing that. So thank you very much for your support. I have been popping some useful links into the chat. So if you're not familiar with our rather busy website, most of the resources are free, and I've popped some links into the chat for you to search at your leisure. Do pop some questions in the Q&A. I'll come back to those in a moment, but it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce our panel members for this short discussion. You all know Rohini Bajekal. She's a nutritionist and board certified lifestyle medicine professional. She leads our communications at Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, and hopefully you've been seeing the upturn in the amount of articles we've got in the mainstream and top tier media recently, so thank you for your hard work there. We have Sam Gould, who's a registered paediatric dietitian working as a regional specialist children's hospital in the UK. Sam gives talks on the topic of plant-based diets for kids for the BDA, which is our British Dietetic Association, and of course for our organisation. And Sam, you're a rare breed. When we find a paediatric dietitian, we hold on to you tight. So it's great to have you as a member and a source of great information. And Jane Thurnell-Read, it's funny that my prompts are telling me to tell everyone that you're in your 70s. I don't normally start by telling people your age. So Jane is in her 70s, but more importantly, she's a font of great knowledge on plant-based diet. She's a best-selling author, so do check her out on Amazon. And very relevant to this month, she's a trustee for Veganuary, which sees its 10th anniversary and has now got global momentum. And for the second year in a row, I'm in the throes of running it at our hospital, King's College Hospital, where staff are signing up for Veganuary, and we've got a stall next week. So this is not something I thought I would be talking about 5 years ago, of veganism within the NHS. So it's great that you're doing such amazing work. So I'm just going to kick off with a sort of brief opener about how long all of you have been vegan and how long did it take you to make the full switch? So how long have you been vegan and how long did it take you to make the switch? I'm just going to briefly tell you that I was vegetarian since 2001, but this is also my 10th anniversary of being vegan, and I did that with my sisters back in 2013, and we all pretty much went from vegetarian to vegan overnight and have never looked back. So we'll start off with you, Sam. Tell us about your vegan journey.
Sam, you're muted.
You're muted, Sam.
There we go.
There we go.
I actually asked, can you hear me? That was my question. So everyone can hear me okay now? Brilliant. Fantastic. So I became vegan about 15 years ago, and I was vegetarian for a couple of years before then, and I was on-off vegetarian for since the age of 10. And it was a very sort of ethical, emotional decision for me. So I didn't approach it in the best way, I'm not going to lie. I think the first 3 months of me going vegan 15 years ago was mostly just eating bread and pasta because I didn't know what I was doing. But then it was a very different time 15 years ago. And then I started learning how to cook with lentils and beans and widened my diet. And it took me about a year to get on top of it and really learn what I was meant to be doing. And obviously now I'm a dietitian. So that obviously was before I became a dietitian, just as a bit of a disclaimer. So that's my story into veganism, really.
Wonderful. Jane?
Okay, I was vegetarian for over 40 years. I'm an ethical vegetarian, but I knew for maybe 20 of those years about the horrors of how we produce milk and eggs and stuff, and I resolutely ignored it. So I have lots of sympathy with people who, people go, how can people not realize this? Well, you just compartmentalize things so that you don't, even though you don't know at the same time about the horrors of factory farming, the horrors of how cows are treated and so on to produce milk. And I became vegan 7 years ago after I met Jane and Matthew, the founders of Veganuary. And we've since become very good friends. And I talked to them and decided to become vegan. And I did that sort of overnight. And I left my partner I thought he was going to carry on being vegetarian. But he didn't. He actually ate all the cheese and everything we had in the house, and then he became vegan too.
Oh, so that's great. That's great when it has a ripple effect on your loved ones as well, because it's challenging when it doesn't. So thank you for sharing that, and great that you've supported Jane and Matthew in their wonderful campaign. So Rohini.
Yeah, I didn't have a totally linear journey, which I now share. I first went vegan when I was 13. My sister, who was younger than me, and she was about 11, had gone vegetarian a couple of years before, and I followed in her footsteps, and so did my mum. And then a couple of years later, she did some digging and realized that the dairy industry wasn't quite as innocent as she thought it was. And she was only 11 at the time. You can see why she became a journalist now, and that she really influenced us all. And then from the age of 13 until the time I left university at 21, I was 100% vegan. Unfortunately, due to a lot of peer pressure, bullying, lots of different issues that I had. This was about 15 years ago. I first went vegan, so over 20 years ago, but 15 years ago, I sort of started to struggle with all of the social pressures that came from how different it was to be vegan back then. I literally didn't know any other vegans apart from my mum and my sister. And I started to eat some dairy and other things when I was outside the house. I never ate meat again. But I always struggled with that internally. I think that feeling when your values don't align with your actions is quite a horrible feeling. And I came back to being vegan and kind of reconnecting with the ethics and things when I was in my mid-20s, and I decided to study nutrition. And it's helped me a lot with my health conditions as well as kind of just making me feel more aligned and practicing self-compassion as well.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. And yes, you do feel a sense of calm and, oneness for choosing to have a diet that's not associated with the cruelty that an omnivore diet is. So thank you for sharing that story. I'm just going to jump in with one of the questions on the Q&A. I'll ask you, Sam. I did mute you, Sam. So if you just unmute for the moment. So I'm just going to ask you the question about the RDA for calcium, because calcium is sort of a hot topic, especially with the recent papers that suggest a higher rate of fracture in those following a vegan diet. We know multiple factors are involved, but calcium being important. The question relates to why you or others might think that the RDA is higher in the US, and certainly the WHO as well recommend 1,000 milligrams per day compared to our 700 in the UK. Have you got a view on why that would be and which is correct?
That's a really interesting question. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure why the recommendations are different, but I do know that a lot of local guidelines and recommendations are based on multiple things, which can include sort of the type of supplementation they use in the foods and what they deem to be the evidence that they're using to sort of create that recommendation. So I'm not entirely sure why those recommendations are higher. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has insight into that. Do you, Shireen?
Yeah, I mean, I think when there is difference, it mainly comes back to not really truly knowing what is optimal, and making sure you have the minimum amount, and what is associated with best health. So it's sort of down to the health outcomes. And I agree, I think it's not clear what is the optimal amount, but we do know that just having more doesn't mean that you improve health outcomes. And then there's this happy medium in terms of the 700 milligrams, which seem to be sufficient for bone health for certain, and achievable in most different diet patterns. Rohini, have you got a view?
And
you're muted as well now.
Yeah, I also think the influence of industry has to be discussed here as well. The dairy lobby is incredibly powerful in the USA. And I do have noticed that supplement recommendations do tend to be on the higher side, not trying to, kind of be a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. But obviously the pharmaceutical industry, the dairy lobby, lots of these have a huge amount of power, and I think it all gets a little bit complicated. I think it's a variety of different things, and obviously diet quality can also be slightly different. I think, as you said, Shireen, it's a good idea to make sure you're getting a mix of different foods in, but I would also recommend switching to plant-based dairy alternatives that are fortified, and calcium set tofu. As I mentioned, not all tofu is created equal that you would buy from the supermarket now, and you get the ones that are set using nigari and things, which might be fine if you're getting a lot of calcium from other sources, but I prefer to choose the ones that are set using calcium.
Yeah, Sam, you were going to say something?
I do know that I do know that the recommendations for calcium in the UK are actually based on the absorption rates of dairy, and that's about sort of 30%. So the amount of calcium found in dairy, we know about 30% of that is absorbed. So that's why they recommend certain amounts of milligrams a day, because they're assuming it's coming from primarily dairy. And something that's quite reassuring is the calcium supplementation used in a lot of the plant-based dairy alternatives has got an equal efficiency or absorbency to the dairy calcium. So you can follow the guidance in terms of how many dairy products a day in the UK and directly link that with your milks and your yogurts, not so much the cheeses, which I can talk about a little bit later. So that's how I know the recommendations are in the UK, but I'm not sure why it's higher in different places. And I imagine Rohini's probably on the money a bit in terms of lobbying from certain organisations and councils that exist.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So just coming back to more about in your individual experiences, Jane, one of the real sort of negative aspects of the way people talk about veganism is that it's not appropriate for people as they age. Nutrient absorption reduces, your protein requirements increase with aging, and therefore it's assumed that a high quality diet would include animal food. So what has been your experience going vegan in your 60s and 70s on a sort of personal level, and for your friends and family, and the feedback you have from them?
Okay, I mean, certainly since the big difference I've noticed from going vegan rather than being whole food vegetarian is in terms of, I do weight training regularly, which some of you know, and my ability to recover from a hard session in the gym has improved dramatically. And I also think I get a lot less inflammation. And I've had quite a conversations with older people about, the importance of an anti-inflammatory diet, because so much of the problems that people experience as they get older are linked to inflammation. And in order to deal with that, you really need to make sure you're eating lots and lots and lots of plants.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think people don't realise how unvaried the typical diet is, and actually adopting a plant-based diet often means you're eating more variety and getting a wider range of nutrients as you pay attention to, as you say, you know, the diet quality a bit more than perhaps we might have been as omnivores or even vegetarians, where often eggs and cheese feature very highly, and doesn't necessarily mean you're eating lots of healthy plant foods. Rohini, I might just circle back to you because there are a couple of questions on iodine, just to reiterate what you said about sources of iodine, you know, algae and seaweed versus taking a supplement.
I think that as I mentioned, there are some seaweeds that you do want to stay away from, kelp, hijiki. When it comes to nori, again, amounts can be quite variable, but I think it's about 4 sheets a day. I think the Vegan Society does have some information on exactly on the quantity, but they can never tell you exactly because it varies. But with nori, about 4 sheets a day, or with dulse, you know, adding it onto salads or to stir fries or whatever, but it's something that you have to enjoy the flavor of. Seaweed does have a potent flavor. It doesn't go with a lot of dishes. If you enjoy the flavor, that's amazing. I do really like the flavor, and I do add it to stir fries and things time to time, but I don't eat that food every single day. It's not part of my daily diet. So I do take an iodine supplement. In the UK, salt is not iodized, and it's, whereas in places like India and the USA, it is, and that makes a huge difference. So yeah, don't rely on it, just that you're naturally going to get it through your diet. Dairy is the main source of iodine. So just be savvy about that. And there are more and more brands that are fortifying with iodine, but it's still not the norm. Most plant-based milks and yogurts aren't usually fortified with iodine, but I think that's changing gradually, which is really, it's the way it should be. We should be trending towards that way. So that would be my advice. And if you're currently eating a lot of seaweed products, that's part of your culture, maybe you know, that's something that you have a lot of, you shouldn't just immediately stop that either. That can cause issues. So and especially if you're trying to get pregnant and things, because suddenly dropping levels can also be an issue. So it's all quite complex. I think the safest thing for most people, unless there's something you're regularly consuming, to take a supplement.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Seaweeds are not part of most people's everyday or traditional diet patterns. Thank you. So Sam, coming back to you, as I mentioned, you're a paediatric dietitian, but not only that, you're raising your daughter vegan, so she's been vegan from birth. And one of my questions, but also one from Hannah, one of the criticisms we get as vegans is that it may be irresponsible to raise children vegan. So what do you say as a qualified health professional and a mother about raising vegan children?
That's a really good question. Well, you do need to think about things a little bit more. We live in a non-vegan society, so a lot of the fortification of products is geared towards what's missing from the standard diet in the UK. So it does mean you have to be a bit more savvy about the nutrients you're thinking about. And I mean, Rohini did an excellent coverage of nutrients of consideration, and I would say that you want to be thinking of those with your vegan child as well. Definitely when I'm assessing children in general, I have my eye on calcium and iron and fats. That's really important for any growing child, whether they're vegan or not. So I'd say overall, my top tips would be absolutely utilize those dairy alternatives. It's literally the easiest and quickest way that you can get calcium into your child, and they are often very fondly loved by children. I would say that a lot of the vegan cheeses aren't great choices. They tend not to be very well fortified with calcium, so don't rely on those. And they also tend to be quite high in saturated fat. So while they're a good source of fat, I would say use sparingly, or just from time to time. Tofu obviously is amazing. I love tofu. I think it's an incredible food for a whole number of reasons, and it's highly fortified. And I think the Cauldron brand use calcium carbonate as a fortifier, and it helps to set the tofu. So for about 100 grams of a calcium carbonate set tofu, it's about 350 milligrams of calcium in there, which is really quite incredible. Also a massive focus on iron, so using those sort of leafy greens, fortified cereals. Again, a lot of children love those, and there are quite a few brands that are accidentally vegan, like Weetabix and Ready Brek, for instance. And certain supermarket brands don't include vitamin D. So if there isn't vitamin D as part of the fortification, it's likely going to be a vegan fortified cereal. A lot of the vitamin D found in cereals comes from lanolin or sheep's wool. So look for one that isn't fortified with vitamin D, and that should be fine. A word about fats, because this is really, really important in growing kids. And I must admit, whenever I do an assessment from a vegan family, they usually have got everything really well covered. You know, most families I've met are absolutely brilliant, and they found out most of the information themselves. But the thing that always tends to be slightly lacking is fats. So please do not shy away from using veg oils like rapeseed oil and olive oil in cooking. Use nuts and seeds prepared safely. Use vegan margarines as well, avocados. Don't shy away from fats. And also, I'd definitely recommend using an algal DHA with kids and not just relying on those plant-based ALAs like in chia and hemp and flax, but obviously still include those in foods. It's really good that children are exposed to those foods from a young age. And I'd say the final thing is just absolutely make sure that you're supplementing. We know kids go through picky periods, fussy periods where their intake really dips. And if you've got a really comprehensive vegan multivitamin in the background that contains zinc and selenium and iodine and vitamin D and B12, and even bits of iron, then you can feel a bit more assured that they're being well covered in those periods where they're maybe not eating as well. So those, I'd say, were sort of my main sort of points to put forward in terms of raising vegan kids and feeling confident with it, because when it's well planned, it's absolutely adequate.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And I think, you know, the studies that we do have, they're not as numerous as in the adult population, but it's clear that well-planned vegan diets are appropriate and can support healthy living in children, as you say, and that's supported by the UK British Dietetic Association, which is really useful for all of us here. I'm just going to quickly answer the question about soya products. Sylvie says that she's got an issue about the environmental impact of industrialized production of soy. I guess, you know, just a reminder that only 6 or 7% of soya produced is used for human consumption. Vast majority, so 70–80%, is used for either in animal feed or as biofuel. So it's not us as vegans that are contributing to any environmental destruction from the industrial production of soya. Most of the soya foods in the UK don't come from the Amazon forest anyway. They're sort of from Europe, European grown soya. And actually, you know, when grown appropriately in a mixed farming system, you know, soya is a legume, it fixes nitrogen, it has loads of healthy properties for the soil and the other plants around it. So I think that's a bigger question of how we produce food globally and how we preserve the soils and the environments at the same time as growing nutritious food for us. So I don't personally have a problem with consuming soya, and as I say, that doesn't come from the Amazon mostly, that we consume as humans. So thank you for that question. I'm just going to circle back to you, Jane. We're always interested to hear what people actually eat. So what is it that you eat? Because I know you're a great proponent of a healthy lifestyle in general, you work out loads. What is it that you eat that means that you can be so active and full of energy?
Well, I usually start the day with porridge, usually with some sultanas and some sunflower seeds. Mid-morning, I have a thing about crumpets at the moment, which are just, yeah, with vegan butter on them. So I quite often have one of those with some coffee, or even 2 of those with some coffee. Lunch is usually a salad of some sort, a big salad. Afternoon, I have coffee. I sometimes have a sherry or wine before dinner, and dinner is soup, stews, jacket potatoes, sometimes, I don't know, just a load of toast if I'm tired and can't be bothered to do anything. I always say my diet, I follow a 95% diet. It's 5% rubbish and 95% good whole foods. So I like vegan chocolate, I like vegan ice cream, I like Warburton's crumpets. So yeah, I usually have nuts and I'd have seeds normally in the morning, and then later on in the day I'll have at least one more handful of nuts, very often walnuts, almonds, or cashew nuts. I think some because Brazil nuts have a lot of selenium in them, don't they? And I had a thing of eating lots and lots of Brazil nuts for a while, and I think I actually sort of started to verge towards having excess selenium. So I'm a bit nervous about Brazil nuts now, and tend not to eat those. But yeah, so I try to eat nuts and seeds in the day, and a big salad with lots of veggies and things, and stews and soups and jacket potatoes, sometimes oven chips. I mean,
all your secrets are out. All we're now going to remember is sherry crumpets and oven chips. So let's hope that people also remember that you're eating lots of healthy fruits and vegetables. Do you have a go-to kind of you know, we all worry about protein. Are you a tofu or more beans or lentils? Or...
I mean, beans, lentils and nuts. And I mean, I work out 3 times a week hard. So, you know, I do deadlifting and stuff like that, as lots of you know from you know, post videos on my Instagram account. And I take a vegan shake, a protein shake, vegan protein shake, after I finish the gym. I found that also helps me recover better. And I take one from the vegan supplement store is the one I take. I really like the taste of it. So yeah, so 3 times a week I do that.
Great, thanks, Jane.
Okay.
So just coming back to you, Rohini, I don't know whether you maybe you can just answer the question about dried herbs and spices, and whether you have a view as to whether it's best fresh or dried in terms of antioxidant content.
Amazing question. I actually just wrote an article about this. It's very easy for me to answer, but what I will say is that that herbs and spices are the most antioxidant rich of any food category, and they don't get enough attention. They are actually such a great way if you find other antioxidant rich foods quite expensive, because dried herbs and spices can be really quite cheap, particularly if you shop in more kind of world food stores and things like that. And I recommend a combination. So what are dried herbs? So they've been heated and all the moisture has been removed from them, and so you're going to have some natural loss in nutrients. And the study that I looked at dried basil versus fresh basil, and there was a loss in vitamins A, C and K, but the antioxidant capacity actually stayed relatively similar, which was really promising. It really does come down to kind of the quality of the herbs and spices. And I grew up in, my family's Indian. I grew up in a house where we use loads of herbs and spices in literally every meal. And one of the things is a smell test. So if it doesn't smell of anything, usually it won't really taste of anything. Quite often the quality has been diminished. If you kind of stored them, you made that one dish 3 years ago and you haven't touched that spice since, it may not taste of very much. So store them properly. Don't store them in the bit above your hob where they're exposed to heat all the time and they degrade. Store them in things like a masala dabba, which is a spice tin, or in a drawer which is kept cool. And refrigerating fresh herbs can also decrease the vitamin C content. So it's really best to use fresh herbs within the first 5 days. And it's not always possible to do that. You know, if you live on your own or you're not using these herbs all the time, sometimes they go off. So that's why I do think having dried herbs to hand can be really helpful. I actually store herbs in a water glass, like a bouquet of flowers, and that prolongs the shelf life for longer, like the fridge life. I mean, I keep them in the fridge that way. And that's a really good thing to do, but you want to have your fresh herbs within 5 days. I also do freeze herbs sometimes if they're definitely they're going to go off, and I know rather than chucking them, I freeze them and I put them in the freezer and I chop them into stews and things. You still get the flavour. Of course, the vitamin C vitamin C content is going to be diminished. Dried herbs have a shelf life of around 6 months to up to a year, depending on the type. But hopefully that's been helpful, because a lot of people do get they don't feel that dried herbs and spices are as good, but that's just a total myth.
I know that was really useful, actually, because to be honest, I'm not sure I've really thought about that or even researched that question. So thank you. That was hugely comprehensive. Circling back to you, Sam, I just wanted to ask you what the biggest myths are around vegan diets in children or infants currently, from maybe your clinical practice, your colleagues who may not always be on board with vegan diets for children, or just amongst, mums at school, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would say, non-surprisingly, everyone's probably going to be able to guess, but protein is the big one. A lot of people really worry about protein because we think that protein only comes from animal products, and it's just not true. And we also, most people live in societies where protein is pushed. And actually, of the 3 macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, and protein, protein's actually the one that you need the least amount of in your diet in terms of percentage calories. Having said that, protein is still important. So obviously make sure that you are including plant protein foods at least 2 meals a day. And that'd be things like beans, nuts, seeds, other legumes, tofu. And this is, again, why I'm such a big fan of soy products, because, for instance, things like the soy milk and the soy yogurt have really decent amounts of protein. They have the same amount of protein as dairy milk. So it's equivalent, which is, again, very reassuring. So yeah, protein's the big one. Also, there's lots of sort of myths and concerns about growth as well, and I feel a bit mixed about this. I think we need to do a bit more sort of research on this for sure, just to maybe reassure people. But a lot of people kind of assume that maybe children's IQs will be affected, or that their growth will be affected. But if you are meeting their calcium needs, their iron needs, they're having enough iodine in their diet, zinc, selenium, if they're getting the omega-3s, and enough calories and enough fat, I just really don't see why that would be a problem. And I think that there's so much stuff online now and so many amazing resources. So as parents, there's a lot of stuff that we can look at, like attending this type of webinar as well. So there's a lot of information out there to make sure that we are feeding our children correctly and they're getting everything that they need. So yeah, there is no reason that a child can't thrive. And I know we shouldn't use an N number of 1, but my child is like the height of a 5-year-old, and she's only 3 3/4, and she's always been one of the biggest in her class, and there's never been any concerns or worries about her growth at all. And she's a bit of a selective fussy eater as well, so she's not having loads of weird and wonderful whole foods. A big massive part of her diet are those dairy alternatives, those fortified cereals as well. So it can be done, and it is possible. So yeah, there's a lot of stigma and a lot of concerns, and certain dietetic associations around the world are a bit worried about it. But I'd say many are also convinced that it is okay and it is safe.
Yeah, there is really a lot of scaremongering in the space of vegan diets for children, and certainly media love to pick up these sort of headlines, but actually, as you say, the science supports the ability of a vegan diet to be able to support optimal growth and development, as you say, when it's well planned. And any of these differences in height are very rarely clinically significant. It's in the range of 0.5 to 1 centimetre. It's not something that is really going to impact overall quality of life or other aspects of development. And it's often forgotten to mention the benefits for body weight, blood cholesterol, the nutrients you're getting in fibre-rich diets in general. So yeah, that's really useful. Thanks very much. Jane, so if there happens to be anyone new in this audience, which I feel is going to be mainly a vegan audience, but for somebody who might be new, trying Veganuary for the first time, as an older person, what are your top tips of how to think about veganuary, whether it's an overnight transition or a gentle eating more plant foods? What are your top recommendations?
I mean, I think it is never too late. And the science, you know, there's lots of studies shown that it's never too late to adopt a healthy diet. So whatever age people are. Some people, as they get older, their digestion can't adapt that quickly. So it may be that, you know, trying to go vegan for the whole of January for some older people may actually be quite difficult. And it may be better to, you know, go for a meal that you would normally have meat or dairy or eggs in it, to one of, you know, a meal a day, make it a vegan meal, and then gradually do a much more gradual process of trying out being vegan, rather than, you know, going from a full-on meat and dairy diet one day to a vegan diet the next day, because the gut biome, all the good bacteria in the gut won't be in the proper ratios, etc. You know, and younger people may be able to adapt really quickly because their digestion maybe works better, but for older people, it may be better to do it more slowly.
Yeah, I agree. It's a common thing to hear, isn't it, that people have found their digestion suffers. And we've got a great fact sheet from Rohini in terms of being able to improve your tolerance for beans and legumes, which seem to be the main culprit when it comes to abdominal discomfort anyway. And you're right, it's never too late. I am pretty sure my parents are on this webinar and they will be 80 this year, and they adopted a vegan diet and lifestyle about 5 years ago, perhaps slightly under pressure, but have not regretted it since. And there was a great paper that I know that we've discussed online, Jane, showing that, you know, just shifting to more plant-based eating can, you know, increase life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, even if you do it late in life. I mean, of course, the gains are greater in younger life, but it's never too late to make an impact on your health outcomes as well. So I'm probably going to finish off with this final question from Kevin, although Rohini, you might be telling us to wait for the webinar because there is going to be one. But what are your views on omega-3 testing, and how does it influence how you advise your clients, Rohini?
Yeah, so I have to say, I'm not a total expert on this, but from what I have read, and I have looked into this, that these omega-3 tests, which are offered by private providers in the UK, they're not offered on the NHS currently. They are offered in the US. Again, usually health insurance, from what I've understood in the US, doesn't really cover this. These are not shown to be accurate in the same way that accuracy applies to things like iron testing or vitamin D testing or anything like that. These are very new tests. So I would really look at it with, you know, a pinch of, well, a bucket of salt, really, until we have these tests that are really kind of have been scientifically validated. If you have any information showing otherwise, I would love to see it, but there's a reason why these aren't being taken very seriously. And so I would advise people, rather than spending lots of money on these types of tests, if you are worried about your omega-3 levels, to spend that money on a good quality DHA, EPA supplement. Obviously, some of the foods that are rich in omega-3 are on the pricier side, like chia seeds and walnuts anyway. They're not cheap foods. Flaxseed is definitely the cheapest way of getting it, and it's beneficial for so many different things, including cholesterol, for hormone health. You know, it's a fantastic food to include. So flax seeds are my number one choice, but I think, yeah, save your money and spend it on the food. But that is interesting to note, and thank you for sharing that. I wouldn't, however, read too much into it. I think Didam's also commented that she's done the test. We need to do a webinar on omega-3 clearly and dive into this in more detail, but I don't know if you've heard otherwise, Shireen, but from what I've heard.
I mean, I think, you know, even the great authorities don't recommend testing, and I think, you know, the precautionary view for people on a vegan diet is that it might be prudent, certainly with aging, to take a supplement, although we haven't got enough data to support that. There's a very recent systematic review from Drs. Dean and Aisha Sherzai on the topic, and basically it doesn't bring us any closer to consensus, other than, you know, suggesting that we might consider this, and certainly with aging, and if there's any concerns about cognitive function. The exception to that is obviously for pregnancy and lactation, and again precautionary when raising children, if you're it's sensible, as Sam has already pointed out, to consider a long chain omega-3 fatty acid supplement. So thanks for that, and we will be having a webinar this year on the topic, I think. So thank you ever so much to our panelists, and I'm just going to hand over briefly to Rohini to bring this evening to a close.
Yes, thank you so much, Shireen. So I think, yeah, we've got to 8 o'clock and we've had a really great discussion. We actually managed to cover all of the questions that were answered. There were about almost 20 questions in total. So I hopefully pointed you in the direction of the right resources. But I think hopefully this has allayed people's worries about following a plant-based diet. All of us are doing it. We're all getting balance in, as Jane showed, you know, plant-based diets don't all have to be really rigid or restrictive. There's space for fun foods, there's space for your cultural foods, it can be adapted to different budgets, different lifestyles, different ages, and we just want to get that message out loud and clear, but obviously doing it in a way that, well, you know the science and you can then decide for yourself what's right for you. But yeah, certain supplements can be especially helpful. So hopefully that has helped. And we have tons of resources on our website. I know lots of you had specific questions, which unfortunately we just can't answer on webinars like this because they require a full dietary and health assessment. And if seeing a health professional is out of your reach, then just explore all the resources on our website. We have so many, and consider joining us as a member, because we have about 70 pre-recorded webinars that you can access on every single question that was asked. We already have a webinar on. So we'd love to see you back at our next webinar or joining us as a member. We also have a closed Facebook group where we are, like, the community is really active and shares lots of tips and advice and things. So thank you very much. And yeah, thank you so much, Sam and Jane, for joining, and Shireen, of course, as well. Very, very nice to see everyone. Good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.